Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm extremely delighted to be here today to introduce this important keynote that's going to be exploring the global trends, infrastructure and investment, and how private capital and P3s can help play a role in closing international infrastructure gaps. ACS Infrastructure and Iridium, for those of you who don't know, is part of the ACS group, which includes many other important companies such as Turner Construction, Flatiron Dragados, and Hochtief, amongst many others. And we really pride ourselves on being one of the most global, integrated, and diverse organizations that's focused on developing, investing in, designing, constructing, and operating and maintaining for the long term projects in a vast number of sectors such as transportation, advanced technology, digital infrastructure, energy transition, sustainable mobility, critical minerals, natural resources, and large-scale civil engineering. ACS Group has over 140,000 employees worldwide, and revenues in 2023, to give you an idea of the size, was about 54 billion Canadian. We rank number 2 in the list of top international contractors by Engineering News Record, and we're really proud of our track record, specifically as it relates to P3s, and we've been able to develop over 150 important P3 projects globally. In North America specifically, ACS Infrastructure's P3 portfolio is composed of about 18 projects with a total investment value of almost 42 billion Canadian dollars. And in Canada, we're part of some of the most important projects that include the New Champlain Bridge in Quebec, the Gordie Howe International Bridge project, which will connect Detroit and Windsor, as well as the Honorable Gray Parkway in Windsor that's going to lead up to into the bridge. And here in Toronto specifically, we're also involved in a lot of the important transit projects that are currently being built, including the Eglinton Crosstown and the Finch Light Rail projects. So we really understand infrastructure and we really celebrate it. In addition to our Canadian experience, we have a significant presence in the United States, and we're recently awarded the large P3 project, the SR 400 Managed Lanes project in Georgia, which has a construction value of about $6.4 billion Canadian. But it included as well a large concession payment to the Georgia Department of Transportation of over $4 billion US, so that's about $5.6 billion Canadian. And it really talks about what private finance and private funding can help bring into some of these projects. So based on our experience, and as we look to the future, it's clear that collaboration between the public and the private sector is more crucial than ever. And I think that sets the stage perfectly for our next speaker. So it is a great honor to introduce Aisha Williams, who's the Global Director of the Global Infrastructure Finance Department at the World Bank, as today's keynote speaker. Aisha oversees a team of experts dedicated to increasing private sector participation in infrastructure. The Global Infrastructure Department advises client countries on policies and regulations that help governments build stronger investment environments, prepare infrastructure projects, and structure financial solutions that bring these projects to market. In her talk, Aisha will mine a wealth of data to demonstrate how global trends are shaping infrastructure financing, and she'll explore how the P3 space is evolving globally, and if there's opportunity for more private funding mechanisms such as concession models, tolls, asset monetization, and asset recycling. So please help me this morning in welcoming Aisha to the stage.
Hi, everyone, and good morning. And thank you so much for inviting me here today. As Nuria mentioned, my name is Aisha Williams, and I'm the Director of Global Infrastructure Finance at the World Bank. I am really thrilled to see that the PPP community is alive and well here in Canada. I am doubly thrilled, if not ecstatic that this conference is taking place outside of Washington, D.C. today. So thank you very, very much to the organizers for giving myself and my colleagues the opportunity to escape D.C. Thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to share with you some lessons today about the World Bank's global work to support greater private financing and private participation in infrastructure globally. So I'm going to start with an overview of some of the latest trends shaping the infrastructure finance landscape around the world. And then I'm going to showcase how Canada is contributing to that landscape, and then share how the World Bank Group is innovating to support governments and private companies to close infrastructure gaps. So what I hope to leave you with today is 4 key messages. First, current infrastructure finance levels are insufficient to meet the world's needs as defined by the Sustainable Development Goals and our climate goals. Basically, much larger levels of both public and private investment are needed. Second, Canada has a strong track record in mobilizing private investment for infrastructure, achieving nearly twice the global average. This is due in large part to strong project preparation capabilities, as well as the depth and maturity of domestic financial markets. Third, while Canada is a global leader in private investment in infrastructure, Canadian private sector infrastructure projects in middle and lower income countries lag behind its peers. In other words, Canadian firms are investing in emerging markets at much lower levels than other high-income countries. And then fourth, the World Bank is committed to attracting more private infrastructure investment to emerging markets and lesser developed countries. Evidence suggests that investing in emerging market infrastructure is not only good for development, but has the potential to generate strong risk-adjusted returns to investors. We stand ready to support governments and private companies to achieve these goals. So let's start with the global infrastructure landscape. At the recent World Bank IMF annual meetings in Washington, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, the World Bank president said something that really resonated with me. He said that development delayed is development denied. And one of the biggest reasons that development is being delayed, in particular in middle and lower income countries, is due to the lack of quality infrastructure. Infrastructure impacts around 92% of the Sustainable Development Goals and roughly 80 to 90% of the world's climate change goals. Progress on these goals has stalled, in particular in emerging markets. Today, around 675 million people globally lack access to electricity in their homes. Nearly 4 billion people lack access to the internet. And more than 1 billion people live within 2 or more kilometers away from an all-season, all-access road. Simply put, there cannot be development without quality, sustainable infrastructure. However, current estimates are that around $1.5 trillion a year, annually, is needed in order between now and 2023, in order for the world to achieve its infrastructure goals. And this doesn't account for climate change or natural disasters, which every year add billions to this figure. Globally, core infrastructure as a share of GDP needs to double from around 3.4 to 6.7%. And yet many governments are facing debt crises, and sovereign debt levels are at record highs. To say that public funds are scarce is an understatement. The math simply doesn't add up. Developing country governments, even with the support of multilateral development banks, such as the World Bank, cannot fund the necessary infrastructure needs alone. So this is what brings me here today, to discuss how we can bring more private investment to infrastructure, what we can learn from Canada's experience, and to show you the wide range of tools and programs available to help countries and companies partner to achieve green, inclusive, and sustainable development. So let's turn to Canada and the issue of domestic investment in infrastructure in Canada. So how active are Canadian investors in infrastructure here at home? Briefly put, very active. Private sector investment in infrastructure in Canada is nearly double the global average. As I said, this reflects in large part the depth of the domestic financial markets here in Canada, with non-bank actors such as sovereign wealth funds and pension funds playing a much larger role in infrastructure finance than in other high-income countries. So where are investors allocating their funds? Canada has a higher share of domestic private investment in the transport and social sectors when compared with the global average or the average of other high-income countries. Energy and digital are relatively less, but this could be a result of the data, as the data tracks project finance as opposed to corporate finance. What about PPPs in infrastructure? How do Canada's regulations compare to other countries? In a review of PPP regulations across 140 countries, the World Bank's Benchmarking Infrastructure Development Report identifies Canada as a top performer, ranking or achieving a level of 71 in the index versus the global average of 46. However, lest you rest on your laurels, two areas where Canada can improve are in procurement and contract management. There are a variety of internationally recognized good practices that Canada can incorporate in these areas, including open and competitive bidding processes and payments linked to clear evaluation criteria. This takes us to the issue of private investment by Canadian investors globally. How much Canadian infrastructure investment is landing outside of Canada? On average, Canadian infrastructure financiers invested globally at a level nearly 3 times higher than their peers in other high-income countries. So Canadian infrastructure investors invested at a rate of 2.7% of GDP versus around 1% of GDP invested by financiers in other high-income countries. However, 70% of this total investment on the part of Canadian financiers went to other high-income countries. Less than 40% of investment went to infrastructure projects in low and middle-income countries. So the question is why? The answer is most likely linked to high perceived and real risks in emerging markets. Last year, the World Bank's private sector lending arm, the International Finance Corporation, as well as a consortium of other private sector development finance institutions, published extracts from the Global Emerging Markets Risk Database, or GEMS. These extracts are now publicly available. GEMS is the world's largest EM credit risk database, compiling default and recovery rate data on private investments in emerging markets over the last 20 years. The main findings on infrastructure are that indeed, there are higher risks in investing in infrastructure in emerging markets than there are in high-income markets due to factors such as political instability, the uncertainty around the regulatory regime, as well as the lack of maturity of the financial sector. However, despite these risks, the GEMS data also showed that infrastructure in emerging markets can offer attractive risk-adjusted returns when projects are well-structured and protected against political and currency risks. And this is where we come in at the World Bank. MDBs, multilateral development banks, are uniquely positioned to work across the public and the private sector to support sustainable infrastructure development. And in essence, we work to break down the barriers, such as those dissuading Canadian investors from entering developing country markets. In terms of the World Bank, the public sector arm of the World Bank Group provides financing, technical assistance, global knowledge to governments to support them in building the enabling environment for infrastructure projects. The Global Infrastructure Finance Department at the World Bank is explicitly, where I work, is explicitly focused on mobilizing private investment in infrastructure. Our Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Facility, or PIAF, works upstream to strengthen policies, regulations, and institutions, and to share best practices in infrastructure development across the world. We also have a dedicated data and analytics program through the Global Infrastructure Hub to enable evidence-based decision-making and policy-making in infrastructure finance. Our Global Infrastructure Facility provides project preparation grants and support to governments to build the pipeline of investable projects that can support global investment. Finally, the World Bank Group works directly with private firms and investors through the International Finance Corporation and the Multilateral Insurance Guarantee Association, MIGA. IFC and MIGA provide debt and equity financing, as well as guarantees against political risk and sovereign credit risks to private companies in emerging markets. By deploying these measures, the bank group is trying to make it easier for private investors to be more active in emerging markets. Specifically with respect to PPPs, we offer an extensive array of tools and resources to strengthen government capacity. These include PPP certification programs that have trained over 16,000 professionals on PPPs in emerging markets, as well as a dedicated set of tools to help practitioners implement key considerations around climate and inclusion in the design of their infrastructure projects. All this is to say that at the World Bank and at other multilateral development institutions, we offer a wealth of resources that can be invaluable to countries and investors seeking new funding solutions for infrastructure. We greatly appreciate Canada's commitment to becoming a global leader in mobilizing private capital for infrastructure investments. We understand both the stakes and the obstacles, and we are responding with strategies to bridge infrastructure gaps more rapidly and at greater scale. In closing, let me share with you a tangible example of World Bank Group support for public-private partnerships in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, a coordinated long-term effort across the World Bank Group has supported the government's efforts to liberalize the telecom sector, leading to substantial improvements in services and the introduction of private participation into Ethiopia's telecom sector for the first time. So with that, if I could turn it to the video.
PPIF is a public-private infrastructure advisory facility. This is the only global institution that is dedicated to helping develop upstream environment to facilitate private sector participation in infrastructure services delivery. PIAF has been active in Ethiopia since 2002 and has supported various programs across the different sectors, including the energy sector, digital development space, telecommunications, water and sanitation sectors. In the telecommunications space, PIAF has helped provide support in the re-establishment of ECA, Ethiopian Communications Authority, as an independent telecommunications sector regulator, and also provided support in the development of subsequent regulations that have helped liberalize the market and facilitated the entry of new players within the market. This enhanced competition has not only led to better price discovery in terms of digital and telephony services, but has also expanded the platform for digital services and the quality of digital services available for the citizens in Ethiopia.
So back in 2018, when the new policy on telecom market liberalization was announced by the government, Ethiopians experienced very high prices for telecommunications services, particularly for mobile data, a lack of choice, a lack of quality In particular, the latency times for mobile data were very high, and in many parts of the country, internet simply wasn't available at all. Ethiopia was one of the few remaining large countries that had a monopoly telecommunication environment. Ethio Telecom, the state-owned incumbent, was the only player in the market. It was not until, with the support from the IFC and the World Bank Group in 2020, that a second operator was licensed, and that operator, Safaricom Ethiopia, didn't actually begin to provide services until October 2021. So it was really a period of 3 years that we benefited from PF support for the passage of the law, which opened up the market, the creation of the regulator, which eventually played the role in selecting competitively the new operator, and then setting in place the framework for a competitive market environment. So with the liberalization of the telecommunications market in Ethiopia, the World Bank was able to bring its support both through IFC, which supported the government in the selection of the operator, through MEGA, which supported the investment guarantees for the new operator, and also through the International Development Association. With the introduction of competition from the Safaricom Ethiopia consortium, we've seen a huge investment in new capacity, particularly in 4G cellular mobile networks in outlying areas of the country. And we've seen also the development of new services.
ቴሌኮምም ሳፋሪኮምም ነው የምጠቀመው። ሶሻል ሚዲያም ላይ ዌብሳይታችንም ላይ ሁለቱንም ስልኮች ስለለቀኩኝ ከስተመሮች አንዱን ቢቢላቸው በአንደኛው ይደውላሉ። የኢንተርኔት ሰርቪሱ የሞባይል ሰርቪሱ ኳሊቲያቸው እየተሻሻለ ነው። ተጨማሪ ደግሞ ዋጋቸው እየወረደ ነው። የተለያዩ ሰርቪስ ፓኬጆችንም እያቀረቡ ስላለ በጣም ተጠቃሚ ያደረገን ይገኛል።
ኢትዮ ቴሌኮም በጣም ደግፋለሁኝ። ብዙ ኮኔክሽናቸው እንደገና ደግሞ ኔትወርክ ፍጥን ያለ ከስተመሮች ሲመጡ ብዙ ጊዜ የሚጠይቁኝ ቴሌብር አለ ቴሌኮም ተጠቃሚ ነሽ ምናምን ስለሚሉኝ እንዴ ይሄ ነገር እንዴት ነው ሁሉም ብዙ ከስተመሮች አላቸው ማለት ነው በማለት እኔም ውስጤ ነው በቃ።
Thank you very much. And I'd like to ask my colleague, Jane Jameson, who is the program manager for the Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Group, PF, to join me for the questions.
Well, thank you, Aisha. And we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I think we'll only have time probably for one question. But I found this very interesting, and I think especially given the global trends and the widespread impact of affordability challenges that we're seeing, do you foresee a shift in the global approach to public infrastructure funding? So specifically, could you see growing reliance on private funding mechanisms such as the concession models, tolls, asset monetization, liberalization and privatization, asset recycling, or other P3s? So how are you seeing that trend happening?
Thanks so much, Nuria. You know, it's interesting. Prior to joining the public sector arm of the World Bank, I was with the private sector arm, the International Finance Corporation, for about 20 years. And if you had asked me that question, you know, as much as 15 years ago, our view towards investment in infrastructure was to create, to facilitate improvement in the regulatory environment, and then assume that private investment would just sort of flood into the market. The reality is it's more complicated than that. And blended finance, concessional finance models are often necessary, particularly in the countries in which we work, to help jumpstart markets and help to defray some of the risks that private investors often face, and that serves as a disincentive for them to enter the market. So in order to support both the objectives of increasing private sector mobilization and participation, as well as the development objectives of ensuring distribution of services at a cost that is affordable to most consumers, many development banks, including the World Bank, are now looking at how to effectively deploy subsidization through the government, through donors, to provide, to ensure bankability of these private sector models until they can stand on their own. So I think that's one change that is quite different from the infrastructure investment market that we saw 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for inviting me up, Aisha. I mean, I think to the point, and actually to the point Joanne was making in her opening remarks, I think expanding what we mean by P3 is kind of a critical step that we need to really think about, because as we're saying, at a time when governments are really trying to mobilize more private finance for their infrastructure, it's just at the right time. It is just at the time when, you know, we have a cost of living crisis, the cost of infrastructure inputs is going up significantly. We actually, some of my colleagues took, we had pre-pandemic, the World Bank's had a big program of renewable energy in Africa, and we had some of the lowest solar tariff prices ever seen, you know, 5 cents per kilowatt, really, really low. If you took the inputs today and recalculated what the tariff would be, it was like 40, 50% more expensive. So there's a real challenge there around the affordability. So as Aisha was saying, thinking about models where you bring in blended finance is going to be critical to maintain affordability for customers, but still mobilize private investment. And I think you touched on concession models. I mean, thinking about how we use our governments, think about using their existing infrastructure assets. You know, many governments have invested in public infrastructure for years and are asking, well, A, how do we maintain this in a sustainable manner? And B, how do we extract that value from that asset? You know, we all know the risks of a P3 is really upfront when you're doing construction. So once projects are built, you're bringing down that upfront risk. It's a much more de-risked project. So can we think about how we recycle some of that investment that went in to go into new infrastructure? So Australia, for example, has had quite a big asset recycling program. India now too is looking at their toll roads and saying, well, let's recycle, you know, concession out some of those existing roads and then reinvest in that funding into new roads as well. So I think there's a lot of innovative models we need to start thinking about, and I would love to learn from Canada so that we can share that experience in other countries as well.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting from our perspective, because we, on the private side, and strongly believe in that model of being able to extract, especially de-risked assets, take out that value and reinvest it. But it comes with sometimes the political challenge of users who say, we already paid for this, how can we justify that? So I think your reference to the hybrid model as well might be a way to help, you know, subsidize it to keep the prices down for the affordability, but actually still be able to extract some of that value.
Agreed.
Well, I'm not sure if we have time for potentially any more questions, but I really appreciate the insights, and this was fascinating. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's over.